In today's episode, we uncover the shocking stories of 4 people who risked everything for the perfect selfie. From a zookeeper sneaking into a lion enclosure to impress his girlfriend, to an engaged couple whose attempt to capture a photo with a polar bear led to disaster and the unraveling of their upcoming marriage. But first, we begin with the chilling tale of an Indian taxi driver who tried to take a selfie with a sloth bear, only to be eaten alive. Nestled in the eastern reaches of India lies Odisha, a land where ancient forests meet modern civilization. For centuries, these dense jungles have harbored secrets and dangers, their paths walked by both holy men seeking enlightenment and predators seeking prey. Here in the dense woodlands of the Nabarangpur district, humans and wildlife maintain an uneasy coexistence, one that would be shattered on a warm evening in May 2018. The Kumar family lived in a modest 2-room house on the outskirts of Nabarangpur. Rajesh Kumar, 34, had spent the past decade as a taxi driver, logging endless hours behind the wheel of his aging Tata Indica, a compact car commonly used for transport in India. Its worn exterior and creaking suspension bore the marks of years spent navigating this region's rugged, unpaved roads. Each morning, he would wake before sunrise, kiss his sleeping daughters Anjali and Divya goodbye, and head out in search of fares. His wife Priya would pack him a simple lunch of roti and dal, carefully wrapped in newspaper. They couldn't afford proper containers, but Rajesh never complained. He never imagined that his last early morning with his family would come so soon. That May evening had been different from his usual fare runs. A wealthy businessman had hired several taxis, including Rajesh's, to transport guests from his son's wedding. The Maharaja Golden Marriage Hall had been transformed into a scene from a Bollywood movie, with crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, and food served on gold-plated thalas. As Rajesh ferried the final group of guests home, he couldn't help but think of his own simple wedding to Priya 7 years earlier. Just a small ceremony in the local temple, followed by a modest meal. His passengers, still dressed in their expensive silk garments, chatted about the lavish dowry and the bride's diamond jewelry. The setting sun cast long shadows through the sal trees, turning the narrow road into a corridor of flickering golden shadow. As Rajesh drove, he passed occasional signs warning of wildlife crossings, common in this region where human settlements bordered thick forests teeming with life. In recent weeks, villagers had reported an increase in bear sightings. Several farmers had lost livestock, and forestry officials had issued advisories about sloth bears venturing closer to human settlements. Though primarily insectivores, these bears were known to react aggressively when startled, and with the dry season reducing food availability, encounters had become more frequent. But warnings were easy to ignore, until the danger is staring right back at you. And for Rajesh Kumar, that moment was coming fast. Rajesh pulled his taxi over near a small clearing, needing to relieve himself after hours on the road. His passengers, still in their wedding finery, urged him to wait until they reached the next town, but he stepped toward the tree line, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. It was then, as he approached the forest edge, that he spotted it, a massive sloth bear lying near a small pond. What Rajesh didn't realize was that he'd encountered one of Odisha's most lethal predators. Unlike their Himalayan cousins, these sloth bears had adapted to live surprisingly close to human settlements, making them particularly dangerous. Growing up to 6 feet tall when standing and weighing over 300 pounds, they are primarily insectivores feeding on termites, ants, and fruit. They rarely prey on large animals and typically avoid human interactions. However, when startled or provoked, they can be highly aggressive. Their powerful claws and incredibly strong jaws, capable of crushing coconuts with ease, make them fatal when defending themselves. His passengers shouted for him to hurry back to the taxi, but something possessed Rajesh at that moment. Driven by the desire to take a selfie with the bear, he pulled out his simple phone and stepped closer, ignoring the desperate warnings from his passengers. The attack was quick and brutal. The bear's 5-inch claws tore through Rajesh's chest and abdomen, while its powerful jaws crushed his shoulder and neck. The force of the bear's bite was strong enough to shatter his collarbone and several ribs. His spine was severed in multiple places as the bear shook him violently, and deep lacerations covered much of his body. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes, but by the time the bear finally released him, Rajesh was already dead. In a remarkable display of nature's complexity, a stray dog that had been sleeping nearby suddenly charged forward, biting at the bear's legs in a desperate attempt to drive it away. The bear, already agitated, turned its fury on the smaller animal, swiping at it with its massive claws. The passengers, still frozen in shock inside the taxi, could do nothing but watch as the brutal attack unfolded. Once the bear moved away from Rajesh to focus on the dog, one of the passengers seized the opportunity to act. They scrambled out of the vehicle and ran back toward the road, flagging down a passing motorcyclist. The rider sped to the nearest village where locals quickly relayed the news to forest officials stationed at the Nabarangpur Wildlife Division. Nearly an hour later, a response team arrived with tranquilizer rifles. The bear was still lingering near the clearing, pacing and occasionally swiping at the now injured stray dog that continued barking from a distance. The officials fired 3 tranquilizer darts into the animal, waiting until it finally collapsed before approaching. Once the bear was fully sedated, they loaded it onto a transport vehicle to relocate it to a remote section of the forest. Rajesh's body was then recovered. His phone, still clutched tightly in his hand, revealed a cracked screen displaying his final act, a blurred image of an approaching mass of fur and teeth. After the bear was subdued with tranquilizer darts, authorities transported it to a remote forested area, far from human settlements. With the immediate danger contained, officials recovered Rajesh's body and documented the scene before informing his family. In the days that followed, the impact of his death rippled through the community. The wealthy family whose wedding guests he had been driving covered his funeral expenses and established a small fund for his daughter's education. His wife Priya took up work as a seamstress despite her ongoing health concerns, now forced to provide for their children alone. The taxi company forgave the remainder of Rajesh's loan, allowing his family to keep their modest home. 1 year later, a small shrine stands quietly at the spot where Rajesh lost his life. A simple stone marker serves as both a tribute and a warning, a reminder of nature's unpredictable power and the irreversible price of a single misstep. To this day, people wonder why Rajesh, a hard-working and responsible father, chose to take that fatal selfie. But in our next story, the reason behind the selfie is far more obvious. A zookeeper, desperate to impress his girlfriend, risked everything by posing with a lion. The result? A devastating tragedy that shocked everyone. In the heart of Uzbekistan, where ancient silk roads once carried treasures between east and west, lies a modern city struggling to maintain its aging institutions. Among them, a Soviet-era zoo where magnificent beasts paced behind weathered bars, and where one man's desire to impress would lead to his devastating end. Farouk Ariskalov had worked at the city zoo for over 15 years, his callous hands and weathered face telling the story of countless days spent tending to the facility's residents. At 44, he was neither young nor old, but experienced enough to know better than to do what he was about to attempt. His monthly salary of 15,000 tenge, roughly $35, barely covered his basic needs. But it was his new relationship that made him yearn for something more impressive than being just another underpaid zookeeper. Marina, his girlfriend of 3 months, had captured his heart with her youth and vitality. At 28, she was significantly younger than Farouk, and her constant social media presence made him increasingly aware of the gulf between their worlds. She would often show him viral videos of other zookeepers interacting with their animals, asking why he had never shared such exciting content of his own work. The lion enclosure had always been the zoo's main attraction. 3 magnificent African lions, 1 male and 2 females, had been born in captivity and raised at the facility. The male, whom the staff called Sultan, was particularly impressive with his full mane and powerful build. Despite their captivating upbringing, these were not tame animals, something Farouk knew all too well from years of careful feeding and cleaning routines. On that fateful morning in December 2024, before the zoo opened to the public, Farouk arrived earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen over the Soviet bloc buildings surrounding the zoo, and a light frost still covered the ground. His colleagues would later recall how he had seemed distracted lately, constantly checking his phone and talking about his new relationship. What Farouk didn't realize was that these apex predators, despite years of captivity, retained every instinct of their wild ancestors. African lions capable of bringing down prey weighing up to 1,000 pounds possess jaw strength measuring 1,000 pounds per square inch. A single swipe of their paw can crush a human skull, and their territorial instincts remain as sharp as their 4-inch canines. The footage recovered from Farouk's phone would later reveal his final moments. He approached the enclosure with his phone held high around 5 a.m., recording himself as he spoke to the lions in the enclosure. The animals, usually still drowsy at this hour, began to stir as he drew closer. Then, in a decision that would prove fatal, he did the unthinkable. He entered through the service door. The attack was immediate and devastating. Sultan, the male lion, initially remained still, watching as Farouk approached. Moments later, he moved toward the zookeeper, followed by the 2 lionesses. One of the lions eventually clamped its jaws down on Farouk's arm. His phone, still recording, captured his first screams before being knocked from his grip. With over 800 pounds of muscle and raw power bearing down on him, any chance of escape vanished. The lions continued their attack, overpowering him with ease. There was no one else present at that early hour. Farouk had entered the enclosure alone, and the zoo had not yet opened for the day. His absence was only noticed when the other employees arrived later that morning, and by then, it was far too late. Zoo staff rushed to the lion exhibit once they realized something was wrong, but by then the lions had already mauled him beyond saving. It took animal control officers over an hour to secure the enclosure before they could recover his remains. His phone was later found several feet away, its screen shattered but its recording intact, preserving the horrific final moments of his life. The tragedy quickly gained international attention, with media outlets worldwide reporting on the shocking incident. News platforms highlighted growing concerns over zoo safety protocols and the dangers of close human interaction with wild animals. The footage of Farouk's final moments, which surfaced online, became a focal point of discussion about the risks zookeepers face, fueling debates on whether stricter regulations should be implemented. The zoo administration faced heavy scrutiny for its lack of security, while online discussions raised broader concerns about the responsibilities of institutions housing dangerous predators. Despite speculation, the lions were not euthanized. They had simply followed their natural instincts. Today, they remain at the zoo, with reinforced enclosures and new warning signs in place. Farouk's girlfriend was left devastated, not impressed by the video but broken by the tragedy that ended in heartbreak. But Farouk and his girlfriend weren't the only couple whose lives changed forever. In our next story, an even more serious couple, almost married, found themselves face to face with a polar bear. Not for a selfie, but for a photograph. What was meant to capture a moment of beauty quickly turned into a fatal encounter. On August 20th, 2012, Leila Rodriguez and Ethan Cruz eagerly boarded the Spitsbergen to Victoria cruise, setting off on what was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. They had spent months planning this Arctic expedition, a dream adventure before their wedding in December. As passionate nature lovers and wildlife photographers, the chance to explore the remote icy landscapes of Svalbard, Norway was an opportunity they couldn't pass up. But in the land of the polar bear, one of the world's most fearsome predators, one wrong move could turn admiration into a fatal mistake. The cruise promised breathtaking views of the Arctic wilderness, teeming with its famed marine and land creatures, whales, seals, walruses, and the region's most formidable predator, the polar bear. Their destination was White Island, one of the most isolated and treacherous islands in the Svalbard archipelago. As the ship approached the desolate shores of White Island, the tourist on board marveled at the towering Kettujulen ice cap dominating the horizon, an imposing glacial fortress stretching across most of the island. The moment the guides announced that they could disembark, Leela and Ethan exchanged a look of exhilaration. They had no idea that this moment would be remembered for something far more terrifying than the landscape's beauty. Stepping onto the ice-covered shore, the couple found themselves surrounded by a sharp frozen wilderness untouched by human civilization. Their fellow tourists, wrapped in thick coats, eagerly pulled out their cameras to capture the unearthly beauty of the landscape. At a distance, a group of seals lay basking near the shoreline, their sleek bodies sprawled across the ice. Leela and Ethan, drawn by the opportunity for the perfect wildlife shot, wandered about 50 feet further than the rest of the group. With their cameras slung around their necks, they crouched low, adjusting their lenses for the best angle. The seals remained unbothered, a rare privilege in wildlife photography. They focused intently, snapping frame after frame. So absorbed in capturing the moment, they didn't notice the commotion behind them. Other tourists and the tour guides were yelling and pointing in their direction. When they finally heard the commotion, Leela and Ethan turned around expecting to see another Arctic creature drawing everyone's attention. But the moment they turned, they realized what was happening. A massive polar bear stood just 30 feet behind them. For a brief moment, the bear remained motionless, its black eyes locked onto the two humans who had unknowingly wandered too close. Polar bears are the largest land carnivores on Earth, with adult males weighing up to 1,500 pounds and standing over 10 feet tall on their hind legs. Unlike other bear species, they're almost exclusively carnivorous, relying on seals as their primary food source. While generally avoiding human interaction, polar bears are apex predators with unmatched strength, capable of killing prey with a single powerful bite. In the vast, desolate Arctic, where food is scarce, a hungry or curious bear can become extremely dangerous, especially when humans enter its territory. The tourists and guides shouted and waved their arms, trying to scare it off, but the predator didn't budge. Leela panicked and ran. The moment she moved, the bear's instincts took over. The 1,000-pound predator lunged forward, its powerful limbs covering the icy terrain with alarming speed. The sudden movement had triggered a predatory response, and now the bear was hunting. Ethan froze for a split second before chasing after them. Someone yelled for her to stop running, but it was too late. In a matter of seconds, the gap between Leela and the bear shrank. She was fast, but not nearly fast enough. Polar bears can sprint up to 25 miles per hour, far faster than any human. The bear reached her and struck her from behind, its giant paw slamming into her shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer. She tumbled forward, crashing onto the ice. Before she could scramble away, the bear clamped its powerful jaws around her head. Ethan grabbed the only weapon he had, stones from the ground, and hurled them at the bear, yelling at the top of his lungs. Other tourists joined in, shouting, banging equipment, and throwing whatever they could. The bear ignored them. It had its prey. A tour guide armed with a pistol rushed forward and fired a warning shot into the air. The gunshot momentarily startled the bear, causing it to release its grip for a fraction of a second. Leela was still screaming, blood pouring down her face from the brutal bite. She tried to crawl away, but the bear wasn't done. The guide hesitated. The bear was too close to Leela. Another misfire could kill her. The bear lunged again, this time locking its jaws onto her skull. In desperation, the tour guide fired another shot, this time hitting the bear's shoulder. It let out a deep roar of pain but didn't back away. Another round struck its rib cage, and finally the massive predator stumbled, its injuries beginning to slow it down. Leela stopped screaming. Blood pooled on the ice beneath her. Ethan rushed forward, ignoring the danger, and reached his fiancée just as the bear collapsed. The final bullet pierced the bear's heart, and the enormous predator fell lifeless beside her. Leela was alive, but barely. She had suffered a deep bite wound on the back of her skull, and several of her facial bones were fractured. The bear's teeth had narrowly missed her vertebrae, mere centimeters from severing her spinal cord. A helicopter was called immediately, and within minutes she was airlifted to a hospital in Longyearbyen, the capital of Svalbard. Emergency surgery saved her life, but her recovery would be long and grueling. Ethan never left her side. A few weeks later, Leela spoke to the media about the attack. She didn't blame the bear, but told an interviewer that the bear was only doing what instinct compelled it to do. She admitted, however, that she would never return to the Arctic. The polar bear attack on White Island became one of the most infamous incidents in Arctic tourism history. The tour company faced heavy criticism for allowing tourists to get too close to wildlife without stricter precautions. The bear, estimated to be around 7 years old, had shown no prior aggression toward humans and was likely scavenging along the coast when the group unknowingly approached. New policies were implemented following the attack, including stricter regulations on tourist movements in polar bear territory. Ethan and Leela canceled their December wedding, postponing it until she fully recovered. Though she survived, the scars remained, both physical and emotional. The photographs she had taken of the seals were never recovered. Her camera had been crushed in the attack. But Leela and Ethan's story showed that for all its beauty, the wild remains unpredictable. And when humans cross the line, nature does not forgive. Leela Rodriguez and Ethan Cruz were surrounded by people who acted quickly, trying to protect them during the terrifying polar bear attack. But it raises the question, was it enough? Could more have been done by those watching to prevent the tragedy? In our last story, the situation was far more grim. A man hoping to capture a photograph of a bear was attacked as well, but this time there was no one around to help. He was left completely alone, face to face with a monstrous predator in a fight for survival. On August 24, 2012, the autumn chill had begun to creep into the vast Alaskan wilderness. In the heart of Denali National Park, where the untamed beauty of North America remained as it had for millennia, Richard White was setting up camp. He had spent decades behind the lens, chasing the fleeting moments of nature's raw elegance. At 49, he had long since abandoned the safety of group hikes, preferring solitude among the towering peaks and sprawling tundras. This land was his cathedral, the place where he felt most alive. But even cathedrals can become tombs, and before the sun would set on his final day, Denali would claim him forever. Photography had not always been his calling. As a teenager in San Diego, he had stumbled upon an old camera at a thrift shop, and from that moment, the world took on an entirely new dimension. The lens became his teacher, drawing him into landscapes he might have never explored otherwise. He never intended to make a living from it. His job at a pharmaceutical company paid the bills, but his passion for photography was what tethered him, giving him something to look forward to amid the monotony of daily life. This trip to Denali was not his first. He had visited 3 times before, drawn back by the vast silence and the chance to capture creatures preparing for the long Alaskan winter. August was perfect, just before the deep snows swallowed the land. The bears, lynxes, moose, and smaller creatures of the tundra were all on the move. desperate to store what they could before the season of scarcity arrived. It was, by all accounts, a photographer's paradise. Upon arriving, Richard wasted no time setting up camp. The drive had been long, and with the sun beginning to dip behind the jagged peaks, he hurriedly pitched his tent, stowing away his supplies. That night, he managed only a few shots of the twilight settling over the tundra, the sky painted in purples and golds. By dawn, he was already deep into the wilderness, camera slung around his neck, backpack filled with snacks and extra batteries. The morning air carried the scent of damp earth and pine, and as the first rays of sunlight pierced the treetops, the forest came alive. Squirrels darted between branches, birds took to the skies, and a bull moose waded through a distant marsh. Richard had found his place beside a quiet river where willows hugged the water's edge. It was there, after hours of patience, that he caught sight of something extraordinary: a grizzly bear. A half-ton male lumbered from the tree line, moving with a grace that belied its massive frame. It approached a cluster of berry bushes no more than 60 feet from where Richard sat, plucking the ripe fruit with delicate precision. Richard barely breathed. His fingers worked instinctively, adjusting the focus, snapping frame after frame. A perfect moment in time. A collision of predator and photographer, neither disturbing the other. But as the bear moved, something changed. Richard had always maintained a safe distance from wildlife, trusting that the creatures of Denali would keep theirs as well. But this bear was not turning away, it came closer. 40 feet, then 30. Richard shifted slightly, adjusting his footing. Beneath his foot, a cereal bar wrapper crinkled. The sound broke the stillness. The bear lifted its head, locking eyes with the man behind the lens. Richard froze. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something primal. Slowly, he lifted his camera, snapping one final shot. The bear staring directly into the lens. And then it moved. The impact came like a freight train. Weighing up to 600 pounds, grizzlies can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in a charge, their sheer mass making escape nearly impossible. Half a ton of muscle and instinct slammed into Richard's back, driving him into the dirt. The first scream tore from his throat as claws raked through his jacket, slicing deep into flesh. The bear did not hesitate. It lifted him, tossing him like a rag doll, his body hitting the earth before he could even comprehend the pain. A swipe to the head split his scalp. With claws measuring up to 4 inches long, capable of ripping through flesh and bone with a single strike, the bear's attack was swift and devastating. Another ripped through his shoulder. His body, strong from years of hiking, was no match for the raw force of the bear's fury. When its jaws clamped down on his neck, the world blinked out. For Richard, it ended quickly. The attack had ended his life nearly immediately. The bear, however, was not finished. It dragged his body through the undergrowth, leaving a crimson trail that stretched for nearly 200 yards. There, in a shallow depression, it covered Richard's remains with dirt and leaves, marking the cache as its own. Hours later, a group of hikers stumbled upon his abandoned backpacking camera, the scene before them something out of a nightmare. They ran the 3 miles to the nearest station, and by nightfall, rangers had deployed helicopters and search teams. They followed the blood. The bear was waiting, pacing near the cache, its breath visible in the cold evening air. When the rangers approached, it did not flee. It stood its ground, teeth bared, muscles tensed. They fired warning shots, but the darkness obscured their aim. The bear vanished into the trees. At sunrise, they returned, spotting 5 separate bears in the area from the air, but one kept circling back to the kill site, unwilling to leave. The rangers moved in, rifles steady. 3 shots rang out. The bear staggered, then collapsed. Richard's final images were never released to the public, But for those who saw them, they told a story of the terrifying power of nature, a reminder that even the most seasoned among us can miscalculate the thin line between awe and danger. Richard White had spent a lifetime capturing the beauty of the wilderness, and in the end, it was that wilderness that took him. Thank you for joining us. These stories prove that sometimes the perfect shot comes at a dangerous price. If you were on the edge of your seat, wait until you hear about the most unexpected and downright bizarre encounters between humans and wildlife. We'll see you there.